Imagine you are standing on the side of a dusty Roman road, somewhere outside Jerusalem, around the year 30 AD. The morning air smells of sweat and blood. A crowd presses around you, soldiers, merchants, women, children. Some are weeping, some are simply staring. And ahead of you, barely able to walk, barely recognizable as a man, a figure stumbles forward under the crushing weight of a heavy wooden beam. His back has been shredded open by a Roman whip. His face is swollen and matted with dried blood. A crude crown twisted from thorns has been forced onto his head, not as decoration, but as one final, deliberate act of mockery. Soldiers walk alongside him, not to protect him, but to make sure he reaches his destination alive. Because dying too quickly would defeat the entire purpose. He needs to be seen. He needs to be an example. And within hours, this man will hang between earth and sky on a Roman cross, in full public view, completely exposed, until his body can no longer sustain itself. Now freeze that image for a moment. Because what you just imagined was not meant to inspire hope. It was not meant to inspire anything except absolute, bone-deep terror. And yet, within 3 centuries of that execution, the cross this man died upon would become the official symbol of the most powerful empire on earth. Within 2,000 years, it would be worn around the necks of billions of people across every continent on the planet. How does that happen? How does the most humiliating, most degrading, most fear-inducing execution method in the ancient world become one of the most beloved symbols in all of human history? That is what we are going to explore today. But to truly understand the answer, we first have to go back to the brutal reality of what crucifixion actually was, and what every person in the ancient world felt in their gut when they saw a cross. The world Rome built on fear. Rome did not invent crucifixion. Many historians believe that variations of this execution method existed earlier among the Persians, the Carthaginians, and other ancient civilizations. But what Rome did, with the systematic precision that defined everything about Roman power, was perfected. The Romans transformed crucifixion from a brutal punishment into a sophisticated instrument of political control. It was not simply about killing criminals. It was about sending a message to every single person who witnessed it, and every person who heard about it afterward. That message was simple: obey Rome, or this will happen to you. To truly appreciate how radical this was, you have to understand the world Rome ruled. The Roman Empire at its peak stretched from Britain in the north to Egypt in the south, from Spain in the west to the borders of Persia in the east. Governing this enormous, diverse, frequently rebellious population required more than armies. It required fear. It required the constant, visible reminder that resistance carried consequences too terrible to contemplate. Crucifixion was the ultimate expression of that reminder. It was reserved almost exclusively for the lowest and most despised members of Roman society: slaves, violent criminals, rebels against Roman authority, and enemies of the state. Roman citizens were, in most circumstances, legally protected from this death. The Roman orator Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC, described crucifixion as the most extreme of all penalties, something so cruel and so disgusting that it should never be discussed in polite company, never be seen near a Roman citizen, never even be mentioned in connection with anything honorable. Think about that for a moment. Even the Romans, who built their empire on military brutality, considered crucifixion almost too horrible to describe openly. So when the New Testament tells us that Jesus of Nazareth was crucified, ancient readers understood immediately what that meant in terms of social status, public shame, and political messaging. This was not a quiet execution. This was not even a particularly dramatic one by Roman standards. It was designed to erase a person from the world. Before the cross, the machinery of humiliation. Here is something that is easy to miss when reading the gospel accounts quickly. The crucifixion itself was not even the beginning of the ordeal. By the time a condemned man reached the place of execution, he had often already been through hours of suffering specifically designed to maximize his physical weakness and his public humiliation. It started with the scourging. Roman flogging was not a symbolic punishment. It was a calculated act of near destruction. The instrument typically used was called a flagrum, a short whip fitted with multiple leather straps, each embedded with pieces of bone or metal that would tear into flesh with every stroke. Ancient sources tell us that Roman soldiers were trained in how to use this weapon effectively, and they were not gentle about it. The scourging served multiple purposes. First, it punished. Second, it weakened the condemned, making the crucifixion itself less likely to drag on for days, though that consideration was likely secondary to the spectacle it created. And third, it was itself a public performance. The condemned person was stripped, tied to a post, and flogged in front of witnesses. Shame was built into every step. The Gospels note that after the scourging, Jesus was taken by the soldiers and subjected to a further layer of deliberate mockery. They dressed him in a robe, mimicking royal clothing. They twisted a crown of thorns and pressed it onto his head. They called him King of the Jews while striking him in the face. This was not random cruelty. This was a structured ritual of humiliation. In Roman culture, honor and status were not simply personal attributes. They were social realities, maintained through public perception. To destroy a person's honor publicly, to make them a laughingstock, a spectacle, an object of ridicule, was to destroy them socially in a way that physical pain alone could never achieve. Rome understood this perfectly. And so by the time a condemned prisoner was handed back to be led to execution, he was not just physically broken. He was meant to be symbolically annihilated. The walk nobody wanted to watch, but everyone did. Then came the procession. Many scholars believe that Roman practice required the condemned to carry at least part of the cross, typically the horizontal beam, called the patibulum, through the streets to the place of execution. This procession served Rome's purposes perfectly. It forced the public to witness the punishment directly. There was no looking away, no avoiding it. If the execution site was near a major road, which it often was, deliberately, thousands of travelers and residents would see the condemned man walking toward his death. The Gospels describe this moment with unusual specificity. Jesus, already weakened by the flogging and the sleepless, violent night before, struggled under the weight of the beam. The soldiers, likely impatient with the pace, seized a man named Simon of Cyrene from the crowd and compelled him to carry the crossbeam behind Jesus. That detail has always struck historians as significant. It is not the kind of detail an author would likely invent. It is too specific, too mundane, too much of a distraction from the main narrative. Simon of Cyrene is not a significant theological figure. He is just a man who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and was pressed into service by Roman soldiers. It rings true, and it tells us something important. Jesus arrived at the place of execution in even worse physical condition than we might assume. What did the cross actually look like? Here is a question that surprises many people. Despite centuries of religious art depicting a very specific shape, the long vertical post with a shorter horizontal beam crossing it near the top, historians and archaeologists actually debate what Roman crosses most commonly looked like. The Greek word used in the New Testament, stauros, and the Latin crux used in Roman sources, both originally referred broadly to wooden execution structures, not necessarily to one precise design. Some Roman crosses may have looked like the traditional shape we recognize today. Others may have been T-shaped, with the horizontal beam sitting at the very top of the vertical post. Still, others may have been simple poles, X shapes, or other configurations. What all forms shared was the same core principle. The condemned person was attached, sometimes with ropes, sometimes with nails, sometimes both, to the wooden structure in a way that left them completely exposed, elevated above the crowd, unable to move or hide or protect themselves in any way. Maximum visibility, maximum vulnerability, maximum suffering. Archaeological evidence for crucifixion is, perhaps surprisingly, quite rare. Part of the reason is that Roman practice typically left bodies exposed on the cross after death, meaning the bones were often scattered or destroyed before they could enter the archaeological record. But in 1968, a remarkable discovery was made during construction work in Jerusalem. Excavators found a burial ossuary, a stone box used to collect bones, containing the remains of a man named Yehohanan who had lived in 1st century Jerusalem. And embedded in his heel bone was an iron nail, still bent from where it had struck a knot in the wood, making it impossible to remove. Here, for the first time, was direct physical evidence that nail crucifixion happened exactly as the ancient sources and the New Testament described. The nail was approximately 17 to 18 centimeters long. When you hold that measurement in your mind, the physical reality of crucifixion becomes suddenly and unavoidably concrete. Before we continue, think about what you've heard so far. We have described one of the most brutal, most deliberately humiliating execution methods ever devised by human civilization. A system designed not just to kill, but to erase, to shame, to terrify everyone who witnessed it. And the question still in front of us is this: how did this become a symbol of hope? Because the answer is not obvious, and it is not simple. Keep that question with you as we go deeper. The body on the cross, what medical science tells us. Modern medical researchers have spent decades studying the physiological effects of crucifixion, and their findings, while not all universally agreed upon, paint a picture that is both sobering and consistent with the ancient descriptions. Death by crucifixion likely resulted not from any single cause, but from the accumulated effect of multiple simultaneous catastrophes within the body. Blood loss from the scourging and the nailing would have been significant, creating a state of hypovolemic shock, the body struggling to maintain blood pressure as fluids leaked away. Severe dehydration set in rapidly, especially in the heat of a Palestinian afternoon. Traumatic shock from the physical injuries added another layer of systemic failure. But perhaps the most medically compelling aspect of crucifixion involves breathing. The position of the body on the cross, arms stretched wide and upward, weight hanging from the wrists or hands, placed the chest in a position where exhaling was relatively easy, but full inhalation required active muscular effort. To breathe in properly, the condemned person had to push upward with their legs or pull upward with their arms, briefly relieving the pressure on the chest. For the first hour, this was painful but possible. For the second hour, exhaustion began to make it harder. For the third hour and beyond, every breath became a battle. This is why crucifixion was intentionally slow. Some ancient sources describe victims surviving on the cross for 2, 3, even 4 days before death. This was not accidental. The Romans designed the punishment to be prolonged. Extended exposure meant extended public display, extended suffering, and extended warning to anyone who might consider disobedience. It also explains one of the most specific details in the Gospel of John. Because the next day was a holy day, the Sabbath, the Jewish authorities requested that the soldiers speed up the deaths of the 3 men being crucified. The Roman method for doing this was to break the legs of the condemned. Without the ability to push upward even slightly, the chest could not expand fully, and asphyxiation followed relatively quickly. The Gospel notes that when the soldiers came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead, and so they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear. The text presents this as the fulfillment of 2 scriptural passages, and as historically significant proof of death. Ancient medical observers would have understood that the combination of the flowing blood and water described was consistent with the physical realities of the body after death. The shame that made the message impossible. Now we arrive at the heart of the historical puzzle. Because everything we have described, the scourging, the mocking, the public procession, the nailing, the slow suffocation, all of it was designed with one ultimate purpose beyond simply ending a life. It was designed to destroy meaning. Rome crucified people in public specifically because public shame was meant to be the final word on the condemned person's story. The message was not just this person is dead. The message was this person was nothing. This person deserved the worst we could give them. Do not remember them. Do not follow them. Do not speak their name with honor. This context transforms the entire problem facing the earliest Christians. When the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Corinth, just 20 or 30 years after the crucifixion itself, he acknowledged directly that the message of a crucified Messiah was, in the language of his day, a stumbling block to Jewish listeners and foolishness to Greek ones. He was not exaggerating. For Jewish audiences familiar with their own scriptures, the situation was even more acute. The book of Deuteronomy contained an explicit statement that anyone hung on a tree was under a divine curse. Crucifixion, in this framework, was not neutral. It actively seemed to disqualify Jesus from any claim to divine favor or messianic identity. For Greek and Roman audiences, the problem was equally fundamental, but different in character. In Greco-Roman philosophical and political thought, greatness meant power, victory, and the demonstration of divine favor through success. A god, or the representative of a god, did not get arrested by Roman soldiers, did not get flogged, did not stumble through the streets under a wooden beam, did not die naked on a cross outside a provincial city. The idea that the supreme divine being had entered human history specifically to suffer this death was not just counterintuitive to first-century people. It was, by all the standards of their world, absurd. What the early Christians did with the absurdity. And yet, this is where the historical record becomes genuinely extraordinary. The earliest surviving Christian writings, Paul's letters, which most historians date to within 2 decades of the crucifixion, do not treat the cross as an embarrassing detail to be minimized or explained away. They place it at the absolute center of everything. "I resolved to know nothing among you," Paul wrote, "except Jesus Christ and Him crucified." This is not the language of someone managing a public relations problem. This is not someone carefully avoiding a sensitive topic. This is someone who has concluded that the very thing that makes the message seem impossible is actually the core of its power. And if we think about this purely as historians for a moment, that is a remarkable and somewhat puzzling fact. Because if you were inventing a new religious movement in the 1st century, if you were constructing a mythology designed to attract followers, you would not, under virtually any reasonable calculation, build your entire movement around the story of your leader being executed as a criminal by the occupying power. You would find ways to shift focus. You would emphasize the teachings, the miracles, the community. You would perhaps acknowledge that the leader had died, but you would not plant the execution instrument itself at the center of the story and call it good news. The fact that the earliest Christians did exactly the opposite has puzzled and intrigued historians for generations. One of the most compelling answers is the simplest. They emphasized the cross because they were convinced that something had happened after it, something that changed the meaning of everything that came before: the resurrection and the reversal. The New Testament does not present the crucifixion as a tragedy followed by a miraculous correction. It presents it as the first movement of a story whose second movement, the resurrection, retroactively changed what the first movement meant. The cross, in this theological framework, was not an accident or a defeat to be overcome. It was the moment when the deepest forces of human evil, violence, injustice, betrayal, the abuse of power, were not simply defeated by a display of superior force, but absorbed and transformed from the inside. Different writers within the New Testament explore different dimensions of what this meant. Paul develops an elaborate theology of sacrifice and substitution, the idea that the death of Jesus accomplished something for humanity that humanity could not accomplish for itself. The letter to the Hebrews extends this language. drawing on the entire sacrificial system of the Hebrew Bible to present Jesus as both the priest and the offering. The Gospel of John frames the crucifixion in the language of glory, the moment when the Son of God is paradoxically lifted up in both senses simultaneously. But across all these different theological frameworks, certain themes recur with remarkable consistency. The cross was not the end. Suffering was not the final word. The worst humanity could do had been met, not with overwhelming force from outside, but with something more profound, with voluntary submission, with forgiveness even in the midst of dying, with love that refused to be extinguished by hatred. The Gospel of Luke captures this in a detail that has resonated across 2,000 years. From the cross, according to Luke's account, Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Think about what those words would have meant to anyone who heard them in that context. In a world where honor required vengeance, where status required protecting yourself from humiliation, where the proper response to enemies was either victory over them or death at their hands, the idea of praying for the forgiveness of your executioners was not merely unusual. It was the inversion of everything the ancient world understood about power. The symbol that survived everything. In the decades and centuries after the crucifixion, the cross moved through history in ways that are still difficult to fully comprehend. For the first 3 centuries of Christian history, followers of Jesus were a minority, often a persecuted one, within an empire that had invented the very punishment associated with their founder. The cross was not yet a comfortable symbol. It still carried the weight of everything it had originally meant: shame, degradation, the mark of the outcast. And yet, Christians used it. They carved it into walls. They traced it on their foreheads. They described the death it represented not in apologetic whispers, but in some of the most eloquent writing of the ancient world. Why? Because for those early Christians, the cross had become the proof of something they believed about the nature of reality itself. Not that suffering was good, not that oppression should be accepted, not that justice didn't matter, but that suffering had been entered into, not avoided. That oppression had been faced, not escaped. That death had been met head-on and had not had the final word. The cross said, God was here. In this, in the worst of this. That message carried extraordinary power in a world where the worst was extremely familiar to most people. Slaves found in it the story of a God who had submitted to what they endured. The oppressed found in it the story of power that did not protect itself at their expense. The guilty found in it the possibility of forgiveness that did not require them to pretend they were not guilty. And when the Emperor Constantine, in the early 4th century, reportedly had a vision of the cross before a decisive military battle and subsequently extended toleration to Christianity across the empire, the symbol moved from the margins to the center of civilization and eventually to every corner of the globe. Why this still matters. Nearly 2,000 years later, the cross remains one of the most instantly recognized symbols on Earth. It appears on flags and cathedrals, on jewelry and hospital walls, on the graves of soldiers and the necks of children. Billions of people in hundreds of cultures have made it the central symbol of their faith. But there is a danger in familiarity. When a symbol becomes decorative, it loses its edge. When it becomes comfortable, it loses its weight. And the cross was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be honest. The earliest Christians did not sand down the horror of what the cross was. They did not pretend that what happened on it was anything other than savage, unjust, and brutal. They carried precisely that knowledge forward, the knowledge of what it cost, and proclaimed that it was in exactly that darkness that light had appeared most clearly. That is a very different claim from the polished, symmetrical symbol we often see today. The original cross was rough wood, stained with blood, planted in earth outside a city wall, surrounded by witnesses who understood exactly what it meant in the language of their world. It meant this man was nothing. And the earliest Christians looked at that cross and said, no. It means the opposite. It means that the God who made the world chose to enter the worst of that world rather than stand apart from it. It means that love strong enough to forgive its own killers is stronger than anything that can be done to it. It means that death, despite appearances, does not always have the final word. The real mystery. So, we return to the question we began with. How did an instrument of terror become a symbol of hope? The historical answer is complex. It involves theology, sociology, politics, the psychology of suffering, and the unstoppable momentum of a movement that refused to die along with its founder. But at the deepest level, perhaps the answer is simpler than it looks. The cross became a symbol of hope, not by denying the reality of suffering, but by insisting that suffering is not the end of the story. Not by pretending that darkness does not exist, but by claiming that a light appeared within it that darkness could not overcome. In a world where most people had known the cross of suffering in one form or another, poverty, injustice, grief, loss, the grinding weight of living, the message that suffering had been entered into and transformed rather than simply escaped had a power that no philosophy of avoidance could match. It met people where they actually were, and it told them that even there, even in the worst place, even on the darkest road, even beneath the heaviest beam, they were not alone. A brutal Roman execution became one of the most enduring symbols in human history. Not because it was gentle, not because it was clean, but because of what billions of people across 20 centuries have come to believe happened on the other side of it. And maybe that is the real mystery of the cross. Not simply how people died upon it, but why, 2,000 years later, the story of one man's death upon it still has the power to make people weep, believe, hope, and change. If this documentary moved you or taught you something new, consider sharing it with someone who would appreciate it. Subscribe to Biblical Worlds for more deep dives into the history, archaeology, and human stories behind the ancient world. And tell us in the comments, what aspect of this story hit you hardest?